"There's only room for four," my sister said, as the host led us to a reserved table. Her kids sat, my son and I stood. Her husband added, "You should have called ahead." I nodded and said, "Got it." 10 minutes later, I was across the room laughing with the manager. When dessert came, so did the $3,500 bill, and the look on her face was priceless. But let me back up and tell you how I discovered my own sister had been stealing from me for months, using our dead father's money to fund her lifestyle while planning to destroy my life completely. This is the story of how one humiliating dinner became the best thing that ever happened to me. My name is Nigel, and I should have seen this coming. 3 years ago, when my wife Sarah died in that terrible car accident on Interstate 65, my sister Jessica stepped up to help with my 8-year-old son Tommy. At least that's what I thought was happening. She'd invite us for family dinners, offer to babysit, and generally act like the supportive sister I'd always wished I had growing up. Tonight was supposed to be different. Jessica had called me last Tuesday, practically bubbling with excitement about her promotion to regional sales director at her marketing firm. She wanted to celebrate at Romano's Fine Dining, the kind of upscale restaurant where appetizers cost more than I usually spend on groceries for a week. When she insisted on paying for everything, I felt grateful. Working double shifts at Murphy's Auto Repair to keep Tommy and me afloat meant fancy dinners weren't exactly in our budget. I'd picked up Tommy from his after-school program early, and we both gotten dressed up for the occasion. He wore his best navy blue button-down shirt, the one we'd bought for his school's winter concert, and I'd put on my only decent dress shirt and the tie Sarah had given me for our last anniversary together. Tommy was excited about seeing his cousins Madison and Blake Jessica's 11-year-old twins, who always seemed so polished and confident compared to my shy, thoughtful boy. We arrived at Romano's 30 minutes early, because I'm always paranoid about being late, especially when someone else is doing me a favor. The restaurant was everything I'd expected and more. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in crisp white linens, and servers glided between tables in formal black uniforms that probably cost more than my weekly paycheck. The hostess, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a practiced smile, greeted us warmly when I mentioned we were meeting the Patterson party. Jessica had already arrived with Derek and the twins. She looked stunning in a deep burgundy dress that I was pretty sure was designer, given how it fit her perfectly, and seemed to shimmer under the restaurant's lighting. Derek wore a charcoal gray suit that screamed expensive, complete with gold cufflinks that caught the light when he gestured. The twins were dressed like miniature adults. Madison in a black velvet dress, and Blake in a tiny suit that matched his father's. When the hostess led us to their table, a prime spot near the window with a view of the city's downtown skyline, I felt a moment of pride. My sister had done well for herself, and maybe some of that success could inspire Tommy to dream big too. But then Jessica looked up at us with an expression I'd never seen before, something cold and calculating that made my stomach drop. "There's only room for four," she announced, her voice carrying just enough volume for nearby diners to hear. Her kids sat, my son and I stood. The hostess looked confused, glancing between her reservation book and our group. Derek leaned back in his chair with a smirk that I was starting to realize wasn't as friendly as I'd always assumed. "You should have called ahead." He added, his tone suggesting this was somehow my fault for not anticipating this situation. I felt heat creep up my neck as other patrons glanced our way. Tommy pressed closer to my side, his small hand finding mine as he sensed the tension in the air. The twins were already reaching for breadsticks, chattering about their upcoming spring break trip to Disney World, while completely ignoring their cousin, who stood awkwardly beside the table. I nodded and said, "Got it," because what else could I do? Create a scene in front of my son and embarrass him further. Storm out and prove whatever point Jessica seemed determined to make about my character. Instead, I squeezed Tommy's hand and tried to figure out our next move while processing the hurt that was rapidly turning into something much more dangerous. That's when I overheard Jessica whisper something to Derek that changed everything. Finally, using Dad's money for something worthwhile, she said, thinking the ambient noise of the restaurant would cover her words. But I caught every syllable, and they hit me like a physical blow. 8 months ago, when our father passed away after a brief battle with lung cancer, Jessica had handled all the estate arrangements. She told me there was nothing left after medical bills and funeral expenses, just a pile of debt that she generously offered to handle herself. I'd felt guilty for being relieved knowing I couldn't afford to take on any additional financial burden while supporting Tommy alone. But here she was talking about using Dad's money for dinner at a restaurant where entrees started at $45. The same sister who told me our father died broke was apparently funding her lavish lifestyle with his inheritance. The betrayal was so stunning, so complete that for a moment I couldn't breathe. Tommy tugged on my sleeve, his voice barely audible above the restaurant's gentle buzz of conversation. "Dad, why can't we sit with them?" His innocent question cut through my shock and reminded me that I needed to handle this situation with grace for his sake, if not my own. I knelt down to his level, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "We're going to find our own table, buddy. Sometimes plans change, and that's okay. We'll still have a great dinner together." His dark eyes, so much like Sarah's, searched my face for reassurance, and I made sure he found it there. The hostess approached us again, clearly uncomfortable with the situation unfolding in her restaurant. "Sir, I can seat you and your son at another table if you'd prefer. We have a lovely spot near the piano where it's quieter." Before I could respond, Jessica waved her hand dismissively. "They'll be fine," she told the hostess with the kind of authoritative tone that suggested the matter was closed. "My brother is very resourceful. He'll figure something out." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable, and I saw the hostess's expression shift from confusion to sympathy. Other diners were definitely watching now, and I realized this public humiliation wasn't accidental. Jessica wanted people to see this interaction to witness what she clearly considered my inability to properly plan or provide for my family. But what she didn't know was that her careless whisper about Dad's money had just given me the key to understanding everything that had gone wrong between us since his funeral. And as I led Tommy away from that table, I was already planning how to turn this evening around in ways my sister could never anticipate. I approached the hostess station with Tommy determined to salvage our evening, despite Jessica's calculated humiliation. The young woman behind the podium, whose name tag read Ashley, looked genuinely concerned about what she'd just witnessed. "I'm so sorry about that confusion," she said quietly, glancing back toward Jessica's table. "Let me find you something perfect." She led us to a cozy table for two near the restaurant's impressive stone fireplace, away from the main dining room's scrutinizing eyes but still within view of Jessica's party. As we settled into our seats, Tommy immediately perked up at the sight of the fire crackling behind glass doors. "This is actually cooler than their table, Dad. Look, we can see the flames dancing." His resilience never ceased to amaze me, the way he could find something positive in any situation just like his mother used to do. That's when David Sullivan approached our table. He was a tall man, in his early 40s with prematurely gray hair and kind blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His manner was warm but professional as he introduced himself as the restaurant manager and apologized for any confusion with our seating arrangements. "I noticed you were part of the Patterson party originally," he said, settling into the conversation with genuine interest rather than the perfunctory courtesy I'd expected from restaurant management. "Are you family? Jessica's my sister," I explained, watching his expression carefully. "We were supposed to be celebrating her promotion tonight, but plans changed unexpectedly." David's face shifted almost imperceptibly, and I caught something that looked like recognition. "Patterson," he repeated thoughtfully. "Your sister dines with us fairly regularly. Very successful businesswoman from what I understand." She's mentioned having family, though. The way he paused made me curious. What exactly had Jessica told him about her family, about me? Tommy was studying the children's menu with serious concentration, occasionally glancing toward the fireplace or stealing looks at his cousins across the room. Madison and Blake were laughing loudly at something Derek was saying, their voices carrying over the gentle restaurant atmosphere in a way that suggested they were used to being the center of attention wherever they went. David seemed to notice Tommy's wistful glances toward the other table. First time dining with us, he asked my son directly, which I appreciated. Too many adults talked around children instead of to them. Yes, sir, Tommy replied politely. My aunt said this place is really fancy, and she's right. Everything looks like a palace. David smiled genuinely at that. Well, we definitely try to make every visit feel special. Are you interested in seeing how our kitchen works? We sometimes give tours to curious young diners. Before I could respond, Jessica appeared beside our table. Her approach had been silent, and I wondered how long she'd been listening to our conversation. David stood immediately, his professional demeanor snapping into place. Nigel, there you are, she said with false brightness. I was just telling Derek that maybe this restaurant is a bit too sophisticated for your usual dining preferences. Perhaps you and Tommy would be more comfortable somewhere like McDonald's or Applebee's. The suggestion was delivered with a sweet smile, but every word was chosen to cut. She was making her point clear to David and any nearby diners. I didn't belong in an establishment like Romano's, and neither did my son. Actually, I said evenly, Tommy and I are quite comfortable here. David was just telling us about the kitchen tour they offer. Weren't you, David? David looked between Jessica and me, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't fully understand. Absolutely, he confirmed. We love sharing our passion for culinary arts with interested guests. Jessica's smile faltered slightly. Oh, that's really not necessary. I'm sure Nigel doesn't want to impose on your staff's time. He's always been very conscious about not being a burden to others. There was that condescension again, wrapped in seemingly considerate words. But I could see David processing the interaction, his manager's instincts picking up on the dynamics at play. Tommy looked up from his menu with bright curiosity. Could we really see the kitchen, Dad? That would be amazing. I think that sounds like a wonderful idea, I told David, keeping my voice warm and grateful. We'd love to learn more about how a restaurant like this operates. Jessica's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, I should get back to Derek and the twins. They're waiting for me to help them choose wine pairings for dinner. She turned to David with renewed charm. We're celebrating my promotion to regional sales director tonight. It's been quite a profitable year for our family. Congratulations, David replied politely, though something in his tone had cooled since the beginning of the conversation. After Jessica returned to her table, David sat back down with us. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but your sister has a very different way of talking about family when she's here alone. My pulse quickened. Different how? He glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard, then leaned forward slightly. She's mentioned having a brother who's had some challenges with responsibility, particularly since becoming a single parent. She's painted a picture of someone who struggles with financial decisions and family obligations. The words hit me like cold water. Jessica had been systematically undermining my reputation with strangers, building a narrative about my supposed failures as a father and provider. The implications were staggering, especially considering what I'd overheard about Dad's money. Tommy had been listening to our conversation with the kind of focused attention that kids develop when they sense important, adult information being discussed. Dad works really hard, he said quietly to David. He fixes cars all day, and sometimes at night too, and he always makes sure I have everything I need. The simple loyalty in my son's voice made my chest tight with emotion. David's expression softened as he looked at Tommy, clearly seeing a well-mannered, thoughtful child who contradicted everything Jessica had apparently told him. You know what David said, standing up with sudden decision. I think you two would be much more comfortable at my private table in our VIP section. It has the best view in the house, and we can continue our conversation without interruption. As he led us across the restaurant toward a secluded corner booth with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, I caught Jessica's eye. She was watching our movement with obvious displeasure, her celebration dinner clearly not going according to her carefully planned script. But what Jessica didn't know was that her attempt to humiliate me had just connected me with exactly the right person at exactly the right time. And as David settled us into the most prestigious seating in the restaurant, I realized this evening was about to become far more interesting than either of us had anticipated. David's private table was situated in an alcove that offered complete privacy while maintaining a commanding view of both the restaurant and the city beyond. The lighting was softer here, more intimate, and I could see why this was reserved for the manager's personal use. Tommy was fascinated by the view, pressing his face to the window to watch traffic flowing through the streets 30 floors below. I have to ask, David said once we were settled with drinks. What's the real story here? Because the person your sister described doesn't match the father I'm observing tonight. I found myself opening up to this stranger in a way I hadn't with anyone since Sarah's death. I told him about losing my wife, about working multiple jobs to keep our small apartment and pay for Tommy's after-school care, about the constant worry that I wasn't enough for my son. I explained how grateful I'd felt when Jessica stepped up to help, and how confused I'd been by the gradual cooling of our relationship over recent months. She used to invite us over regularly, I said, watching Tommy trace patterns on the window with his finger. But lately, every interaction feels loaded with judgment. Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating her success, but it feels more like she wanted to prove some point about my failures. David listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. His attention was complete and genuine, the kind of focused listening that had become rare in my experience. When I mentioned overhearing Jessica's comment about using Dad's money, his expression grew more serious. "Tell me about your father's estate," he said gently. "What exactly did Jessica tell you about the inheritance?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Eugene Walsh, my father's former business partner and closest friend. I almost declined the call, but something made me answer instead. "Nigel. Thank God I finally reached you." Eugene's voice was urgent, stressed in a way I'd never heard before. "I've been trying to call you for 3 weeks. Your sister told me you'd moved out of state, but your number was still local, so I kept trying." "Eugene, what's wrong?" I stepped away from the table slightly, though David could clearly hear both sides of the conversation. "It's about your father's estate. There are some serious irregularities in the accounts, and your name is all over the withdrawal documents. The IRS has started asking questions about unreported income, and I need to talk to you immediately." My blood turned to ice. What withdrawal documents? Jessica told me there was no money left after Dad's medical bills and funeral expenses. The silence on Eugene's end spoke volumes. "Nigel, your father left nearly $250,000 between his business accounts and life insurance. Jessica has been accessing those accounts using power of attorney documents that list you as a co-beneficiary. She's withdrawn over $200,000 in the past 8 months." The restaurant around me seemed to fade away as Eugene's words sank in. Jessica hadn't just lied about the inheritance, she'd been actively stealing it while using my name to cover her tracks. If the IRS was investigating, I could be facing fraud charges for crimes I didn't even know were being committed. "Eugene, I need you to email me everything you have right now. Every document, every transaction record, everything. And I need to know exactly what my legal exposure is here." David, who had been listening with growing concern, slid a business card across the table. "Eugene, this is my attorney's email address," I said, reading from the card. "Send everything there immediately and copy me on all of it." After I hung up, David's expression was grim. "How well do you know your sister's financial situation?" he asked. I thought about Jessica's designer dress, Derek's expensive watch, their casual mention of Disney World trips, and wine pairings that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Pretty well now," I said bitterly. "She's been living high while I worked 70-hour weeks just to keep Tommy fed and housed." David excused himself and returned 5 minutes later with a laptop and a serious expression. "Nigel, I need to tell you something else. I'm not just the manager here. I'm also an attorney though I've been mostly retired from practice for the past 2 years. My full name is David Sullivan, and I used to be a partner at Sullivan Martinez and Associates. The name was familiar from billboards and television commercials. They specialized in estate law and financial crimes, exactly the kind of legal firepower I couldn't afford but desperately needed. This situation is worse than you realize, David continued. If Jessica has been forging your signature or using your identity to access estate funds, she's committed multiple felonies. But more importantly, she's set you up to take the fall if anyone investigates. Tommy had fallen asleep in the corner of the booth, exhausted by the emotional stress of the evening, even though he didn't fully understand what was happening. Looking at his peaceful face, I felt a surge of protective fury that surprised me with its intensity. What do I need to do? I asked David. First, we need to document everything. Then we need to move fast before she can cover her tracks or point investigators in your direction. He opened his laptop and began typing quickly. I'm calling my former partner Carmen Martinez. She specializes in financial fraud, and if she's available tonight, we're going to build a case that protects you and exposes what Jessica has really been doing. As David worked, I looked across the restaurant toward Jessica's table. She and Derek were sharing an expensive bottle of wine, laughing about something, while Madison and Blake played games on their phones. They looked like the perfect, successful family, the kind of people who belonged in restaurants like Romano's. But I was beginning to understand that their perfection was built on stolen money and calculated cruelty. Jessica hadn't just taken my inheritance. She'd stolen my father's final gift to his grandchildren and used it to fund a lifestyle designed to make me feel inadequate and ashamed. The worst part was realizing this humiliation tonight wasn't random meanness. It was strategic, designed to establish a pattern of behavior that would support whatever larger plan she had in mind. And as David's fingers flew across his keyboard, building the legal foundation for my defense, I wondered just how deep this betrayal really went. David's phone call to Carmen Martinez lasted 15 minutes, during which he spoke in rapid legal terminology that made it clear this situation was far more serious than even I had imagined. When he hung up, his expression was both determined and concerned. Carmen's driving over from her downtown office, he told me. She's bringing a complete financial crimes investigation kit, and she's already contacted someone at the district attorney's office to give us a heads up about what we're dealing with. While we waited, David led Tommy and me up a narrow staircase to his private office above the restaurant. The space was warm and professional, filled with law books and restaurant industry publications. A comfortable leather couch sat against one wall, and Tommy curled up there with a soft blanket David provided, still sleeping peacefully, despite the chaos surrounding us. Eugene's email arrived within minutes, and the documentation was overwhelming. Bank statements showed regular withdrawals ranging from $5,000 to $15,000, all authorized with signatures that looked remarkably like mine but contained subtle differences I could now identify. Power of attorney documents bore my forged signature, giving Jessica legal authority to act on my behalf in estate matters. Most damaging were the tax documents Jessica had filed claiming me as a co-recipient of estate distributions. According to the IRS, I had received significant unreported income and owed substantial taxes on money I'd never seen. The penalty fees alone would have bankrupted me. David studied each document with professional intensity, occasionally making notes or highlighting specific sections. This is systematic and sophisticated, he said finally. Your sister either has legal training herself, or she's been working with someone who does. Carmen Martinez arrived 45 minutes later, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s who carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to handling high-stakes situations. She embraced David warmly before turning her attention to me with focused professionalism. Tell me everything, she said, pulling out a digital recorder and legal pad. Start from your father's death, and don't leave out any detail, no matter how small it seems. For the next hour, I recounted every interaction with Jessica. Since Dad's funeral, every conversation about money, every moment when her behavior had seemed off. But I dismissed my concerns as grief or stress. Carmen asked pointed questions about dates, times, witnesses, and documentation. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair with a grim expression. Nigel, your sister hasn't just committed theft. She's engaged in a systematic campaign of identity fraud, tax evasion, and what appears to be preparation for a complete frame job. What do you mean by frame job? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. Carmen pulled out her phone and showed me a contact entry. I made some calls while driving over here. Jessica Patterson has an appointment tomorrow morning at 9:30 with Detective Rodriguez at the 3rd Precinct. She's planning to report financial fraud committed by her brother. The words hit me like a physical blow. Tomorrow morning, while I would presumably be getting ready for work, my sister was planning to accuse me of the crime she'd been committing for months. The timing was perfect from her perspective. I'd be caught completely off guard with no preparation or legal representation. The timeline makes sense now, David said quietly. Tonight's public humiliation wasn't just cruelty. It was establishing a pattern of behavior, showing witnesses that you're desperate and unstable. Carmen nodded grimly. She'll tell police that your erratic behavior tonight proves you're capable of financial crimes. The restaurant staff and other diners will remember seeing you excluded from the family dinner, standing awkwardly, while she and her family enjoyed themselves. It paints a picture of someone who might be motivated to steal from family members. I looked at Tommy sleeping peacefully on the couch, completely unaware that his entire world was about to be destroyed by someone who was supposed to love and protect him. The thought of him having to visit me in prison or worse, being placed in foster care while I fought false charges made me feel physically sick. What can we do? I asked. Carmen's smile was sharp and professional. We're going to beat her to the punch. But first we need her to incriminate herself further. David, does this restaurant have recording capabilities? David's expression brightened with understanding. Full audio-visual recording in our private dining rooms, completely legal in this state as long as one party consents. We installed the system for security purposes, but it works perfectly for documenting conversations. Carmen's plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would invite Jessica and her family for a complimentary dessert service in Romano's most exclusive private dining room, ostensibly as part of the celebration package for her promotion. The room's sophisticated recording equipment would capture whatever we could get her to say about her financial situation, her plans for me, or her feelings about family obligations. But we needed to be careful. If Jessica suspected anything, she could simply remain silent or leave immediately. We needed her relaxed and confident, feeling superior and in control, exactly the emotional state that might prompt her to reveal more than she intended. While Carmen prepared legal documents to freeze the remaining estate assets and protect me from criminal liability, David returned to the restaurant floor. His mission was to approach Jessica's table with an offer too appealing for her ego to resist a private VIP dessert experience that would demonstrate her importance and success to everyone in the restaurant. Tommy stirred on the couch, opening his eyes slowly as he adjusted to the unfamiliar surroundings. Dad, where are we? We're in Mr. David's office, I explained, sitting beside him and smoothing his hair. Some grown-ups made some bad choices and we're trying to fix things so they don't hurt our family. Tommy's intuitive understanding always amazed me. Is Aunt Jessica one of the grown-ups who made bad choices? Yes, buddy. She took some money that was supposed to help us, and she's been lying about it for a long time. Tommy considered this information with serious 8-year-old logic. Are we going to be okay? I pulled him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo and feeling the solid warmth of his small body against mine. We're going to be better than okay. We found some really good people to help us, and we're going to make sure the truth comes out. As David returned with news that Jessica had eagerly accepted the VIP dessert invitation, I realized that my son and I were no longer fighting this battle alone. For the first time since Sarah's death, I had allies who understood the stakes and possessed the skills to help us win. The evening that had started with such painful humiliation was about to become the foundation for justice, truth, and a future I was only beginning to imagine. Carmen's phone buzzed with a text message that made her expression darken significantly. She read it twice before looking up at David and me with barely controlled anger. "We have a problem," she said, showing us her phone. "My contact at the district attorney's office just sent me this. Jessica didn't just schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning. She's already filed preliminary paperwork accusing you of elder fraud and identity theft." The documents on Carmen's screen outlined a detailed accusation that painted me as a desperate single father who had manipulated our dying father into signing over financial control, then systematically drained his accounts, while hiding the theft from other family members. According to Jessica's version, I had forged documents, lied about the estate's value, and was now planning to disappear with the stolen money. Most chilling was a section describing my alleged mental instability following my wife's death, suggesting that grief had driven me to increasingly desperate measures. Jessica claimed she had tried to help, but was becoming afraid of my unpredictable behavior and its impact on Tommy's well-being. "This is character assassination," David said quietly, reading over Carmen's shoulder. "She's not just trying to frame you for theft. She's building a case for custody." The words made my stomach drop. "Custody of Tommy." Carmen nodded grimly. "Look at the language she's using. Unstable single father, erratic behavior, inability to provide proper care. She's documenting everything needed to petition for emergency custody once you're arrested." I thought about Jessica's comments earlier about better schools and opportunities, her casual discussion of Tommy's living arrangements with her family. She hadn't been making idle conversation. She'd been outlining her actual plans for my son's future. Tommy stirred on the couch, and I moved closer to ensure our conversation wouldn't wake him. The idea that someone could simply take him away based on lies and fabricated evidence felt like the deepest violation imaginable. "There's more." Carmen continued, scrolling through additional documents. "She's filed paperwork requesting immediate asset seizure to prevent further theft. If this goes through, they could freeze your bank accounts, impound your car, even restrict your ability to travel with Tommy." David's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. "She's trying to destroy him completely. Financial ruin, criminal charges, loss of his son. It's systematic and thorough." But now I understood why tonight's dinner humiliation had been so important to Jessica's timeline. She needed recent documentation of my supposed instability and poor judgment. The restaurant staff and other diners who witnessed our interaction would become unwitting witnesses to support her narrative about my character flaws. Carmen closed her phone and turned to me with steely determination. "Nigel, what your sister has done goes beyond simple theft. This is a coordinated attack on your entire life, planned and executed over months. But she's made one critical mistake." "What's that?" "She's assumed you're helpless and friendless, with no resources to fight back. She's counted on your isolation and grief to keep you from discovering her crimes until it was too late to defend yourself." David stood and moved to his office window, looking down at the restaurant below, where Jessica was presumably enjoying her expensive dinner. "Our plan needs to be more aggressive than just recording a casual conversation. We need her to confess to specific crimes while demonstrating clear intent to destroy Nigel's life." Carmen opened her briefcase and pulled out sophisticated recording equipment. "This is law enforcement-grade audio and video recording. Combined with the restaurant's existing security system, we'll have multiple angles and crystal clear sound quality." "But how do we get her to actually confess?" I asked. "Jessica's not stupid. If she senses any kind of trap, she'll just leave." "That's where psychology comes in," David explained. "Your sister is riding high on what she believes is imminent victory. She spent months planning this attack, and tomorrow morning she expects to see you arrested and humiliated. Tonight is her celebration, her moment of triumph." "People in that emotional state often can't resist gloating," Carmen added. especially someone with Jessica's apparent need for control and superiority. If we can get her alone with family members she considers beneath her, she might reveal more than she intends. The plan they outlined was complex but elegant. David would approach Jessica's table with an exclusive offer, Romano's most prestigious VIP dining experience, complete with personally selected wine pairings and a private chef presentation. The private dining room would be beautifully appointed but completely wired for recording. Tommy would be crucial to the plan's success. His presence would make the situation feel casual and family-oriented, reducing Jessica's suspicions while potentially prompting her to discuss her future plans for him. Children often inspired adults to speak more freely about their intentions and motivations. I felt uncomfortable using my son in this way, but Carmen assured me that Tommy would be completely safe and that his role would simply be to ask innocent questions about family plans and future arrangements. Kids naturally asked about where they would live, what school they would attend, and which adults would take care of them. David returned to the restaurant floor to extend the VIP invitation, while Carmen and I prepared the legal documentation that would be filed immediately after Jessica's confession was recorded. Search warrants for her home and computer asset freezing orders, and criminal charges that would put her behind bars long before she could appear at tomorrow morning's police station appointment. Tommy woke up as we were finalizing our preparations, stretching and looking around David's office with curiosity rather than fear. His resilience continued to amaze me, the way he adapted to new situations with the kind of flexibility that came from having lived through genuine trauma and emerged stronger. "Dad, are we going to see Aunt Jessica again tonight?" he asked. "Yes, buddy. She invited us to have dessert with them in a special room downstairs. But I need you to help me with something important, okay?" I explained in age-appropriate terms that some adults had been lying about money, and that we needed to record them telling the truth so the police could understand what really happened. Tommy listened with serious attention, asking thoughtful questions about right and wrong, truth and lies, and the consequences people faced when they hurt their families. I can ask them questions he offered quietly. Kids can ask things that adults can't write. His perceptiveness never failed to surprise me. Exactly right. Sometimes grown-ups will tell children things they wouldn't tell other adults. David returned with good news. Jessica had not only accepted the VIP invitation, but had specifically requested that Tommy and I be included. She wants the whole family together for this celebration, he reported with a grim smile. Carmen checked her recording equipment one final time, while I held Tommy close, breathing in his familiar scent and drawing strength from his steady presence. In less than an hour, we would either expose Jessica's crimes and protect our future, or watch everything fall apart in ways I couldn't bear to imagine. But as we prepared to head downstairs to the most important conversation of our lives, I realized that for the first time in months, I wasn't facing this crisis alone. Tommy and I had found allies who understood the stakes and possessed both the skills and the determination to help us fight for justice. The trap was set and Jessica was walking directly into it. The VIP dining room at Romano's was everything David had promised and more. Soft lighting from an ornate chandelier cast warm shadows across mahogany walls lined with wine displays, and the table was set with the restaurant's finest china and crystal. Fresh orchids served as centerpieces, and the overall atmosphere suggested the kind of exclusive experience reserved for only the most important guests. Jessica entered the room practically glowing with satisfaction, Derek following behind her with the twins in tow. Madison and Blake were impressed by the elegant surroundings, their usual chatter subdued by the formal atmosphere. Tommy stayed close to my side, but I could see him taking in every detail with quiet curiosity. "This is absolutely magnificent," Jessica declared, settling into the chair David held for her. "Derek, look at this wine selection. This must be their private reserve collection." David presented the evening's dessert offerings with professional flair, explaining each option while Carmen monitored the recording equipment from the adjacent observation room. The hidden cameras captured every angle of the table, and sensitive microphones picked up even whispered conversations with perfect clarity. I'd like to propose a toast, Derek announced, raising his wine glass with theatrical flourish. To my brilliant wife, whose hard work and dedication have finally paid off in the success she's always deserved. Jessica beamed at the praise, clearly enjoying her moment in the spotlight. It has been quite a year of growth and opportunity, she agreed. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions about family priorities and resource allocation to achieve your goals. The phrase resource allocation made my skin crawl, knowing what I now knew about where her resources had actually originated. But I kept my expression neutral, playing the role of grateful younger brother invited to share in his successful sister's celebration. Tommy, sitting between Madison and Blake, looked around the table with wide eyes. Aunt Jessica Madison said you guys are going to Disney World for spring break. That sounds amazing. Jessica's smile widened as she turned her attention to her daughter. We're actually thinking about making it an annual tradition. When you work hard and make smart financial decisions, you can afford to give your children experiences that create lasting memories. The implicit contrast was clear. Responsible parents like Jessica could provide magical vacations, while people like me struggled to keep their children fed and housed. But Tommy's next question shifted the conversation in exactly the direction Carmen and I had hoped. Aunt Jessica, if something happened to my dad, would I come live with your family? The innocence of the question caught Jessica off guard, and for a moment her polished facade slipped slightly. Well, sweetie, that's something grown-ups would have to discuss and decide based on what's best for everyone involved. Derek leaned forward with false concern. Tommy, why are you thinking about something like that? Has your father been talking to you about adult worries? I could see the trap being laid the way they were steering the conversation toward evidence of my supposed instability and poor parenting choices. But Tommy's response was perfect in its natural honesty. No, my dad never talks to me about scary things. But sometimes I wonder about the future because I don't have a mom anymore, and I want to make sure I'll always be safe. Jessica's expression softened in what appeared to be genuine emotion, but I was beginning to recognize the calculated quality beneath her displays of feeling. Of course, you'll always be safe, honey. Family takes care of family even when some people make poor choices that affect everyone. The wine was clearly affecting her judgment, and Derek seemed to be encouraging her to speak more freely. That's why it's so important to have responsible family members who can step in when necessary, he added meaningfully. Tommy looked directly at Jessica with the kind of penetrating gaze that children sometimes possessed. Would I go to your school district? Madison says it's really good. We have excellent schools, Jessica replied, warming to the topic. Much better resources and opportunities than what you're currently experiencing. Advanced placement programs, technology labs, music and arts programs that prepare students for competitive colleges. The way she spoke about Tommy's future education with such specific detail made it clear this wasn't hypothetical planning. She had obviously researched schools, programs, and opportunities in her district with my son specifically in mind. Blake, who had been quietly eating his dessert, suddenly piped up with childish curiosity. Mom, if Tommy lived with us, would we get more money from the government like you said? Jessica's face went white, and Derek quickly tried to cover the awkward moment. Blake, that's not appropriate dinner conversation. But Tommy had latched onto the comment with 8-year-old persistence. What kind of money? I get something called survivor benefits because my mom died. Is that what Blake means? The silence at the table was deafening. Jessica clearly hadn't expected her children to reveal information about financial motivations, and she was struggling to regain control of the conversation. Derek's attempt at damage control only made things worse. Children don't understand the complexities of government assistance programs, he said condescendingly. Sometimes families receive help with expenses related to caring for children in difficult circumstances. Tommy's next question was delivered with devastating innocence. Like the money from my grandfather that my dad said we never got. Jessica's wine glass trembled slightly in her hand. I don't know what your father has told you about your grandfather's estate, but sometimes adults misunderstand financial situations, especially when they're under stress. But I was watching her carefully now, and I could see the cracks forming in her composure. The wine, the elegant surroundings, and the stress of maintaining her performance were beginning to take their toll. Actually, Jessica, I said quietly, I've learned quite a bit about Dad's estate recently. Maybe you could help me understand why there seems to be such a discrepancy between what you told me and what actually happened. Her eyes sharpened with sudden wariness. I have no idea what you're talking about, Nigel. I've been completely transparent about everything related to Dad's finances. Tommy looked between us with growing concern, sensing adult tension, but not understanding its source. Derek reached for Jessica's hand in what appeared to be a calming gesture, but I could see him squeezing slightly, warning her to be careful. But Jessica's need for control and superiority was stronger than her caution. She had spent months building toward this moment, planning my destruction, with meticulous care, and she apparently couldn't resist the opportunity to demonstrate her intellectual and strategic superiority. The truth is, Nigel, she said with cold precision, that some people are simply better equipped to handle complex financial and family responsibilities than others. Dad's estate required careful management by someone with proper judgment and long-term planning capabilities. The admission was subtle but clear. She had access to Dad's estate and had been managing it according to her own judgment rather than mine. Derek's face showed alarm at her directness, but Jessica was beyond his control now. Tommy's final question sealed her fate completely. Aunt Jessica, my dad works really hard to take care of me. Why do you always talk like he's not good at being a parent? Jessica's response revealed everything Carmen needed for a complete confession. Because, sweetheart, sometimes people who mean well don't have the education resources or emotional stability to provide the kind of life children deserve. That's why responsible family members sometimes have to make difficult decisions about custody arrangements and financial management, even when it means protecting children from parents who can't see past their own limitations. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, revealing not just her theft of the inheritance, but her complete plan to destroy my life and take my son. Derek's face had gone pale as he realized what Jessica had just confessed to recording equipment that would soon be in the hands of law enforcement. But Jessica wasn't finished. She leaned forward with the kind of cruel satisfaction that came from believing she held all the power. Tomorrow morning, Nigel, you're going to discover that actions have consequences. And Tommy is going to learn what it means to live with a family that can actually provide for his needs and future. The confession was complete damning and captured in perfect digital clarity from multiple angles. As Carmen entered the room with two police detectives who had been monitoring the conversation from the restaurant's security office, Jessica's expression transformed from triumph to horror in the space of a single heartbeat. Her reign of manipulation and theft was over, and justice was finally about to begin. Detective Sarah Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran of financial crimes investigations, and her partner, Detective Michael Thompson, specialized in family exploitation cases. They had been reviewing our evidence in real time through the restaurant's security monitoring system, and their expressions were grim as they entered the VIP dining room. Jessica Patterson Rodriguez said in a clear, authoritative voice, "You're under arrest for elder fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Derek Patterson, you're under arrest as an accessory to financial crimes and conspiracy." The transformation in Jessica's demeanor was immediate and complete. The confident, superior woman who had been outlining her plans to steal my son and destroy my life became a panicked, desperate person, grasping for any possible escape from the consequences of her actions. "This is insane," she protested, her voice rising to near hysteria. "I haven't done anything wrong. My brother is unstable and has been stealing from our father's estate. I have documentation proving everything I've said." Detective Thompson calmly pulled out his digital recorder. "Ma'am, we have 47 minutes of recorded confession in which you admitted to managing estate funds without authorization, planning to petition for custody, based on false accusations, and deliberately concealing financial information from legal beneficiaries." Madison and Blake were crying now, confused and frightened by seeing their parents handcuffed in front of them. A social worker named Patricia Chen had arrived to help with the children's immediate care, and she knelt beside them with gentle reassurance. Tommy pressed close to my side, his small hand gripping mine tightly. "Dad, what's happening to Aunt Jessica and Uncle Derek? They made some very bad choices that hurt people." I explained quietly, and now they have to face the consequences. The police are here to make sure everyone stays safe. Carmen approached with a folder full of legal documents that had been prepared throughout the evening. "Nigel, I filed emergency motions to freeze all remaining estate assets, clear your name from any fraudulent tax documents, and establish temporary protective custody arrangements for you and Tommy." And the next several hours passed in a blur of legal procedures, police statements, and child welfare assessments. Patricia Chen interviewed Tommy privately to ensure his emotional well-being, and her report noted his remarkable resilience and the strong, healthy relationship he maintained with his father. Eugene Walsh arrived at midnight with additional documentation that painted an even clearer picture of Jessica's systematic theft. Bank records showed she had been planning this fraud since before Dad's funeral, accessing his business accounts and personal savings with forged power of attorney documents that she had apparently been preparing for months. Most shocking was the discovery of a detailed timeline found on Derek's laptop outlining their complete plan: steal the inheritance frame. Nigel for financial crimes petition, for custody, during his legal troubles, and use Tommy's survivor benefits, along with government assistance, to offset the costs of raising him while maintaining their upgraded lifestyle. The timeline included research on custody laws, investigation into my work schedule and living arrangements, and even notes about which of my personal relationships could be exploited to support their case for my unfitness as a parent. David had remained at the restaurant throughout the entire process, providing coffee, quiet spaces for interviews, and steadfast emotional support for both Tommy and me. His transformation from restaurant manager to legal ally to genuine friend happened so naturally that it felt like finding family I never knew I had. 6 weeks later, the legal resolution was complete and overwhelming in its thoroughness. Jessica pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges and received 18 months in federal prison, along with full financial restitution and 5 years of probation. Derek received 6 months in county jail and community service for his role in the conspiracy. More importantly, the court's investigation revealed that Dad's estate was worth over $300,000 after all assets were properly calculated. Jessica had not only stolen our inheritance, but had undervalued the total estate to make her theft seem less significant. The financial recovery changed everything for Tommy and me. We moved out of our cramped apartment into a small house with a yard where Tommy could play and ride his bicycle. I was able to reduce my work schedule to part-time hours, allowing me to be present for school events, homework help, and the simple daily moments that make childhood magical. Eugene offered me a partnership in Dad's automotive parts business, which had continued operating successfully throughout the estate proceedings. The opportunity meant stable income health benefits and a chance to build something lasting for Tommy's future. But perhaps the most significant change was the friendship that developed with David and his extended circle. He introduced us to his nephew Marcus, a boy Tommy's age who became his closest friend. Their families gathered regularly for dinners, holiday celebrations, and the kind of warm, supportive relationships I'd always hoped to provide for my son. David's transition from restaurant management back to limited legal practice allowed him to help other families facing similar crises of exploitation and financial abuse. He and Carmen established a pro bono clinic that specifically assisted single parents and elderly victims of family financial crimes. 1 year later, we gathered at Romano's for Tommy's 9th birthday celebration. The restaurant had become a special place for us, representing not the scene of humiliation I'd initially experienced, but the location where truth, justice, and genuine human kindness had prevailed over calculated cruelty. Tommy gave a short speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes. He thanked David for being like a grandfather, Carmen for protecting our family, Eugene for helping us understand Dad's legacy, and me for never giving up when things got scary and confusing. The most powerful moment came when he said, "I learned that real family isn't just people who share your DNA. Real family is people who love you, protect you, and tell you the truth even when it's hard to hear." As I looked around the table at faces filled with genuine affection and commitment to our well-being, I realized Tommy had articulated something profound about human relationships that many adults never fully understand. Jessica's empty chair at what was supposed to be a celebration of her success had been replaced by a table full of people who truly cared about Tommy's happiness and future. Her attempt to isolate and destroy us had instead led us to a chosen family, more loving and supportive than anything we could have imagined. The greatest lesson from that terrible night was that courage to stand up for truth combined with the willingness to accept help from unexpected sources can transform even the most painful betrayals into foundations for better lives. Sometimes the people who try to tear you down inadvertently introduce you to the ones who will lift you up higher than you ever thought possible. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to rebuild your life after discovering someone close to you wasn't who you thought they were? Share your story in the comments below because your experience might help someone else who's facing a similar situation. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help other people find it when they need encouragement. Subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult times, and share this with anyone who might benefit from knowing they're not alone in facing family challenges. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that even in our darkest moments, there are good people ready to help us find our way back to the light. Take care of yourselves and each other.